with Trek, they're a massive company, but, and no, I know they're, yeah, we can get, I'll just finish it up with chainstays. Hey everyone, I'm Mike Kasmer. Welcome to the Pinkbike Enduro Freeride Field Test. I'm taking a look at bikes with more than 160 millimeters of rear travel, ones that are focused on descending but can still be pedaled to the top. Behind me, we've got the new Trek Slash. This 2021 model has seen some significant updates over the previous version in the form of longer and slacker geometry, a little bit more travel, and it also has bonus snack storage. The bike's intended purpose is still the same. It's designed to be an enduro race bike or just a bike for someone that wants to go fast on some rowdy terrain. Let's start with the suspension. This bike still uses Trek's ABP suspension design. That's active braking pivot. Basically, you have the pivot around the rear axle. The overall suspension layout of the Slash is really similar to the previous version, and yes, it still looks a lot like a Session. For this version, they focused on the shock itself. In this case, at the higher end level, you get RockShox Super Deluxe through shaft shock. Basically what that means is that the damper shaft exits out the bottom of the shock. It means that there's one solid column of oil moving up and down as the bike goes through its travel, and that's designed just to provide extra consistent performance. And the internal of that shock are a lot like RockShox Deluxe shock. So a lot of Deluxe and Super Deluxes going on there, but basically they just tried to get the best tune they could for this bike. It has a numbered rebound dial, which is one of those clever little things that I'm not sure why people haven't done before. So basically, if the setup guide says you need to run 7 clicks of rebound, you can just look at the dial and turn it to 7. It also has a 3-position compression switch, so when the shock's in the more open position, you can select from a firm, kind of medium, and a soft setting, so you can really fine-tune the bike for the terrain that you're riding. Let's dig a little bit into the frame details of the new Slash. There's aluminum and carbon models. Right here, we've got the carbon 9.9 X01 version. The biggest feature of both the aluminum and the carbon ones, the biggest new feature, is the fact that there's in-frame storage. The little compartment sits underneath with a water bottle cage. You can just easily undo it, pops off, and then you can access your tools and whatever other goodies you want to stash in there. It's obviously not a new concept. We've seen it from Specialized in the past, but I think it's a great idea, and the more companies that do it, the better. Just nice to not have to carry a pack and a bunch of stuff on your back when you're going out for a shorter ride. Trek also refined their knock block technology. Basically, that's a little stop up here that limits how far your handlebars can turn. The previous version was kind of polarizing because it stopped the bars from turning a little too soon for some riders' liking. And a really steep switchback, you could encounter it and it could kind of hinder the bike's handling. This new one has more range of motion. I think it's up to 77 degrees, so the bars can turn pretty far before you hit that block there. And if you don't like it, it's removable because they've changed the shape of the down tube. It used to be straight, now it's got this little curve, so if you took the knock block out, you can do bar spins and X-ups to your heart's content. Other frame details include a threaded bottom bracket. That's something that a lot of riders are gonna be happy to hear. Pretty good frame protection as well, that chain slap guard. It's nice, you got generous down tube protection. You can remove it if you wanted to save a few grams, but not sure why you'd wanna do that. You might as well protect your frame. And the down tube protection goes all the way from basically the top of the down tube to the bottom. So if you're tossing this in the back of a shuttle truck, it's getting knocked around, it's going to help protect things from getting scuffed or potentially broken. The frame still has adjustable geometry via this little chip here, called our Minolink chip, so you can have a high and a low setting. It changes the head angle by about 1/2 degree. I feel like most riders will put it in the slack position and call it good, but there is some adjustability built in there. And then the last frame detail, it's going to be the move to a 34.9 seat tube diameter. We're starting to see that across the board from numerous manufacturers. As dropper post lengths get longer, it's nice to have that bigger diameter, lets you put a bigger, more robust post in there. This size large comes with a 170 millimeter dropper post, but we'll talk more about dropper post lengths and exactly what fits this frame a little later on in this video. I mentioned that the Slash received the longer and slacker treatment. So what that means, the head angle now sits at 64.1 degrees in the slack setting. Using that little flip chip, you can steepen it up to 64.6 degrees if you felt like it. The reach on a size large, now 486 millimeters. That actually gives it the longest reach number out of all 5 bikes in this little roundup. Chainstay length is the same for all the bikes in the lineup, and that's at 437 millimeters. Trek also steepened up the seat tube angle. It now sits at 75.6 degrees. So not quite as steep as we're seeing from some other companies, but it is significantly steeper than the previous version. And it's worth mentioning that Trek's sizing, they've added an extra size in there. So there's a medium large. So now it goes small, medium, medium large, large, XL. So a total of 5 sizes should allow this bike to fit to a wide range of rider heights. This bike here, this is the 9.9 X01 version, and that retails for $8,000 US. I know, that's a lot of money. But the good news is Trek offers the entry-level Trek/aluminum for $3,500. So there's a wide range of price points available for this bike. What do you get for $8,000? Well, start off up front, you've got a RockShox Zeb. That has 170 millimeters of travel. It's got that super deluxe shock that I mentioned before. You have Bontrager's line carbon wheels. You also have an X01 drivetrain. That's a SRAM X01 drivetrain, 12 speeds. Brakes are handled by SRAM as well, and there's the code RSCs. A Bontrager carbon bar and a Bontrager line dropper post. So got some house brand components in there, but the suspension, the drivetrain, and the brakes are all high-end components, and that's where that higher price comes from. Total weight for this bike, as it sits here, 32.5 pounds. That's for a size large. And that's the second lightest bike that we have in this 5-bike roundup. Getting the Slash set up was nice and easy. I ended up running 30% sag in the rear shock. One thing I did do is trim the handlebars down. They're a massive 820 millimeters wide out of the box, which it's a little wide for my taste. I like wide bars, but 820 is a little excessive, so trim those down to my preferred 780 millimeter width. The bike also comes with a 35 millimeter stem. I prefer a 40, so I switched that out. Just little things just to make the bike feel more comfortable and to suit my needs, but nothing out of the ordinary, pretty straightforward. I didn't need to do anything with the volume spacers or tokens or anything like that. Out of the box, it was ready to roll. The Slash is billed as an enduro race bike, but even at enduro races, there's some climbing involved, so I took this thing on plenty of long climbs to see how it felt. Not a ton of suspension bob. You can run that in the open setting, especially if you're using that middle compression setting. They've added a little more anti-squat to this one compared to the previous version, so it's a decent climber. You can just kind of sit and spin. You don't need to worry about it just feeling like you're hopping around on a waterbed. The one thing that kind of separates this bike from some of the other bikes in this test that have steeper seat tube angles, you do notice the front end length. I think this one sits with a top tube length around 649 millimeters. You can compare that to the propane that we also had on test, and that one's 612 millimeters. Pretty decent difference, and what that means, all those numbers, is that on this one you feel a little more stretched out. I was able to slam the seat forward, get a good climbing position, and one that worked well for my 5'11" height, but I did feel like when I was sitting, there's just more room, and that's all right if you're climbing up some, fire road climbs or grinding up a paved road. But when it does get tighter, sometimes that front wheel feels like it's a little further out there. The bike just kind of has a more lazy feel to it than one with a steeper seat tube angle. So I think they could have gone a little steeper, but again, the seats have rails for a reason. You can slam it forward and you can get a climbing position that feels pretty good for long days. Just it's not quite as steep as some of the others that we're reviewing here. I spent a lot of time on the previous version of the Slash, so with this one, it was interesting to see how that felt. One thing's for certain, it hasn't lost any speed. If anything, it's only gotten faster. Kind of lets you carry more speed than you think until you kind of take a look at the surroundings around you whizzing by. I think that's my favorite trait of it. It has a really precise, stiff feel that just lets you let off the brakes, tracks straight down the fall line if you want, but it's still pretty easy to corner, easy to maneuver. It does feel a little bit longer because that longer reach, but shorter back end, you can still slap berms, it jumps really well. Out of all the bikes here, I think this would be towards the top of my list as far as the bike that I would be most likely to take into the bike park. Love to spend a day hitting some A-line laps and then mixing it up with some super techie trails. This bike could do it all. You also have that 3-position compression switch on the shock, and that does make a difference. Most of the time, I just left it in the middle setting, called it good. But for more kind of flowy, just straight up jump lines, you can firm things up, gives a little bit more pop. And then for when it was really wet, or kind of needed some extra traction, I could put it in the negative setting or the lightest compression setting, really help that wheel stay stuck to the ground. I think that's one of the things that helps this bike stand out is that tune on that shock. Works really well, very well suited to the bike, just gives it the right amount of traction and support. I didn't need to mess with volume spacers like I mentioned before, but there is room to further fine tune it for riders or racers who really want this bike perfectly matched to their needs. One area that I think could be tweaked a little bit in future versions is that chainstay length. It is fun, it's a little bit shorter, kind of easy to slap it around. In the steeps is nice because it really lets you carve the bike. But I just have a feeling that taller riders might want a little bit more length out back. Something we're seeing from a lot of companies is different chainstay lengths for different size bikes. And in my mind, that makes a lot of sense. Overall, this bike feels like a race bike should, but you can still take it out for non-race runs and have a good time. For the time test laps, I ended up with my third fastest time on the Slash. It's just 1.6 seconds off the top time. Like those top 3 bikes, they're all so close that kind of, one extra pedal stroke here could probably make the difference, but definitely feels fast. And, in the top 3, I think that's a good number. Time to go over some of the parts in this bike. Let's start with that Super Deluxe shock. I mentioned a bunch of times before, but I was really impressed with it. It worked well. It still has some of that proprietary Trek technology. You could put something different on here if you were totally adverse to that, but it's been working great. The tune is well matched to the bike, so good job to Trek and the RockShox engineers. They got that dialed. Zeb up front worked well also. Out of the 5 bikes we have, the other ones all have Fox 38s, so it's kind of nice to give the Zeb a try. I'm able to find my happy place with both forks. There's a slight difference in how they feel on the trail. It's kind of hard to put into words, but overall, easy to set up, issue-free. The Zeb worked well on this bike. Let's talk about that dropper post. This has Bontrager's new Line Elite dropper post. They said they sped up the return speed. It's still not quite as quick as some of the other options out there. And then there's also the fact that the overall length is fairly long. This came with a 170 millimeter drop, which was all right. In my ideal world, it would come with one that has 200 millimeters of drop. So I actually had a Bontrager one, the new one, on hand. So I put the 200 millimeter one in here. I couldn't fit it. I didn't have enough insertion room to make that post work. I ended up trying a 1-up dropper post. That worked, so I could run an extra long dropper. But overall, that Line Elite dropper, I feel like there's still room for improvement there. This one comes with 175 millimeter cranks. Now, that's not a huge deal for larger, taller riders. Longer cranks are all right. But you gotta remember, this is an enduro race bike. You're gonna be going through mixed terrain, a lot of times chunky, rocky terrain. It's only 5 millimeters, but that can be the difference between smacking a rock and not smacking a rock. I think just speccing 170s would be the way to go. What are the pros of the Trek Slash? I'd say that light and stiff frame, definitely one of the highlights. Just encourages you to go fast. That in conjunction with that great shock tune, feels like a race bike should. Also the fact that it has a wide range of sizes available, 5 sizes, and in carbon and aluminum. So basically there's a Slash for a wide range of riders. In-frame storage is also a great feature. Nice to just be able to get things off your back into the frame. Again, that's available on the carbon and aluminum frames. As far as cons go, I'd say that seat tube angle still could be a little bit steeper. That would just improve the fit during climbing. And the final little nitpick would be chainstay length. I'd love to see a version of this that has some adjustability in the chainstay length. Again, just to allow to get a more balanced feel for all rider sizes. Who's the Slash for? Well, it still maintains its place in Trek's lineup as an excellent enduro race bike. I can see a privateer racer chalking up some good results on this one. Encourages you to go fast, has that stiffness and precision that you're looking for in a race bike, but you could also build it up into more of an all-mountain machine if you wanted to stick some lighter parts on it and kind of have it as your do-it-all big mountain adventure bike. A lot of versatility here, and all those improvements, they paid off. There you have it, that's the Trek Slash. Stay tuned for more content from the Pinkbike field test, including our always popular Huck to Flat. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.